loss of more lives.
The proceeding was brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
Hello to the 2.5 billion people in the Commonwealth. Hello, world. A warm welcome from St. John's, Antigua and Barbuda, and to the studios of ABS Television for this massive global television event. My name is Garfield Burford, and I'll be your host for the most anticipated youth report from the Commonwealth. Breaking news now as we look at trends, triumphs and travails with young people navigating rapidly changing realities. A significant portion of my youth was spent in journalism, being in this field now for over 2 decades. I have covered the challenges of young people in my native Jamaica and across the wider Caribbean, including here in Antigua and Barbuda, where I now broadcast from. I have faced some of the challenges myself and tasted some of the successes too, receiving the Prime Minister's Youth Award for Excellence in Journalism in 2004 in Jamaica and winning several awards since then. What I do know from my experience is that there are adversities, but also opportunities aplenty. And this is what we unpack in this fast-moving program today. Well, this is the launch of the 2020 Global Youth Development Index. And in this special Commonwealth-wide program, we'll find out what it's all about and how it's critical in measuring the development progress of over 1.8 billion young people around the world. Shortly, I will be joined by the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, as well as selected guests, each of whom will share their thoughts on this, the third Global Youth Development Index and Report, a gift from the Commonwealth to the world. But before we go into the details of the report, here's how the index actually works.
The Youth Development Index, or YDI, is an aggregate of indicators that measure progress on youth development around the globe. The 2020 Youth Development Index measured progress in 181 countries, including 48 of the 54 Commonwealth countries, across 6 domains of youth development: health and well-being, education, employment and opportunity, political and civic participation, and, for the first time, peace and security, and equality and inclusion. Changes in 27 indicators across all 6 domains were tracked over the period 2010 to 2018, charting progress of young people aged from 15 to 29 years old. Each YDI score is a number between 0 and 1, with 1 representing the highest level of youth development, allowing countries to be rated as having very high, high, medium, or low levels of youth development. Increasing or declining scores signal the need for further investigation and dialogue and prompt action to scale up good practice or undertake reforms. And while the YDI score isn't a definitive analysis of each country's policies or programs, it plays a major role in ensuring that young people don't get left behind in their pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. Anyone can access the data, making it a vital tool to researchers, policymakers, civil society, and, of course, young people themselves, helping check their progress towards youth development in the world across 6 key domains of youth development.
Well, the latest YDI report is officially launched today. And let's cross now to London, where we can join the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, QC. Let's hear what she has to say.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, Commonwealth friends and colleagues. On the eve of the International Youth Day, and looking forward to celebrations throughout the Commonwealth and wider world to mark the day, it is good to have this opportunity to address you as we launch our Global Youth Development Index report and website. The topics and factors covered in the report have seldom, if ever, been of such immense importance as now, nationally and internationally, and above all, multilaterally. It is vital for us to work together in mutual support to recover and rebuild from the sad losses and other consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to build back better, it is imperative that we draw on the energy and imagination of our young people. Following a period of immense social and economic dislocation and turmoil, our focus for the future must be on reconnecting with one another and on innovating and transforming to build greater resilience in our systems. In the Commonwealth, we are fortunate to be able to draw on the resourcefulness and creativity of the more than 1.2 billion young people between the ages of 15 and 29 years who live in our 54 member nations and who are indispensable to delivering a common future which is fairer and more inclusive, more sustainable and more resilient. Continuing progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is vital to building the world we want to see. And to do so, we need to be able reliably and progressively to measure and monitor the ways in which young people live, learn, and work in our communities. We need to be able to assess the extent to which young people are encouraged and empowered to add their contributions to our societies and supported with enabling policies and tools. The Global Youth Development Index, a gift from the Commonwealth to the world, is one of the tools that has significantly enhanced our capacity to interrogate and assess that progress. Now in its third iteration, this 2020 index has been expanded to include additional and broader measurements of factors which affect progress on equality and inclusion and on peace and security, whilst continuing to analyse changes in the foundational elements of the index: education, health and well-being, employment and opportunity, and political and civic participation. In order to advance youth development in our Commonwealth family, we have included a discrete review of the Commonwealth member states, with specific attention given to our small states, who are peculiarly vulnerable at this time of acute climatic and financial risk as we emerge from the pandemic. The multiplicity of the risks faced by small and vulnerable states obliges us to look beyond GDP as the sole criterion for assistance. A new measure needs to be found, one which will more accurately evaluate the reality they face and build the resilience which is necessary if we are to guarantee the security which our young people need. We hope that our proposals for a universal vulnerability index will work in harmony with our youth index so that our young people are not at risk of being left behind. The title of the report, Taking Charge of Our Future, was chosen carefully to express the content it presented primarily from the perspective of youth. We believe young people have the innovative solutions to drive the change we need to see in the world as we grapple with the consequences of a pandemic. Through case studies, we demonstrate the meaningful ways in which young people are already taking responsibility for their future and successfully leading sustainable development work at all levels of society. This report we launched today should be seen as reflecting on policy issues which define our contemporary world: mental health and well-being, unemployment, climate change, and social inclusion and political participation. A principal objective is for the report and its contents to be used to create additional opportunities for intergenerational dialogue and lead to greater inclusion of youth perspectives in all aspects of thinking and planning on development. In rebuilding nationally and internationally, in our communities and collectively in the Commonwealth, from the many impacts COVID-19, it will be important to focus on the fundamentals of human capital development. This means paying attention in particular to depredations and disproportionate disruption to education, employment, experience, by young people. We need transformative programs for investing in the health and well-being of our youth and for mobilizing their advocacy and practical action to build a more equal, just and peaceful world. Let us be inspired by the profiles featured in this report of Commonwealth youth who, through their imagination and innovation, with commitment to collective action and inclusiveness, are driving forward in fairer and more sustainable ways, delivery of our common future.
We'll be catching up with the Secretary General a little later on in the program. But now let's see how some other global leaders have been responding to the report. Here is the Honorable Nirabashitsi Sarah Mateki, Chair of the Commonwealth Youth Ministerial Task Force and Minister of State for Youth and Children Affairs in the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development of Uganda.
It is my pleasure to participate in this launch event as the new chair of the Commonwealth Youth Ministers Task Force. Ministers mandated the Secretariat to strengthen the Global Youth Development Index to include the experiences of vulnerable young people, those living in poverty, and those with disabilities in particular. As youth ministers, we are committed to evidence-based youth policy. The Youth Development Index is a useful tool to help us to set better policies and programs in place and to monitor the impact of the strategies and interventions supported by data, evidence, and research. We are pleased to receive progress reports that since the last meeting in Uganda, regional Youth Development Index reports in Asia and Africa have been prepared. We are also pleased that several national Youth Development Index reports, including in Pakistan, Namibia, Bangladesh, Australia, have been developed or are in final stages of development. The strengthening of the Youth Development Index to include indicators on equality and inclusion and peace and security are positive developments in the 2020 index, and we are pleased to see stronger partnerships being formed with the national statistical offices. So today I welcome the 2020 Global Youth Development Index report and website as it comes at a critical time in the world as we all grapple with the impact of COVID-19 on people's lives and livelihoods. But importantly, as we look towards a better future for all, I congratulate the Commonwealth Secretariat and the Commonwealth Youth Programme for the important work and for the continued support to youth development, not just in the Commonwealth, but in the world. Thank you so much for God and my country.
Thank you so much, the Honorable Nirabashitsi Sarah Mateki. Excellent comments there from the perspective of Uganda. Breaking news across the Commonwealth. You are in tune with a program providing a barometer of progress in a key area across the grouping of some 2.5 billion people. Now, this is the point all 54 nations have been waiting for. What does the report say about your country? And have we been making progress on this? Let's be clear. This report is a useful tool for policymakers. In fact, everyone has access to the data via the YDI website, where we can view and compare relative scores assigned to the 181 countries. We can view their scores over an 8-year period to determine whether trends have been positive or negative in each of the 6 domains of youth development. The report does not give a definitive diagnosis of what is happening within each country, but it does give us case studies and commentary from experts to help us understand the meaning of the scores in a global context and how we can respond. Some countries like Australia, Namibia, and Pakistan have even used the YDI as a model to start developing their own national indices, which support national planning on youth development. So what have we learned so far? Take a look.
Although progress has been slow, youth development continues to improve throughout the world, with the average global youth development score between 2010 and 2018 improving by 3.1%. 156 of the 181 countries have improved their country scores. In the global top 10, Portugal and Luxembourg share 10th place. In 9th place, Ireland. 8th is the Netherlands. And 7th is Switzerland. At 6, it's Sweden. 5, it's Denmark. And at 4 is Malta. In 3rd place, it's Norway. 2nd place is taken by Slovenia. And the top spot, with the highest youth development score, it's Singapore. The top 5 risers over the same period were Afghanistan, India, Russia, Ethiopia, and Burkina Faso, improving their score by, on average, 15.74%. Whilst those with the greatest drop in their scores, with an average deterioration of 10.28%, were Syria, Ukraine, Libya, Yemen, and Jordan. Overall, the global average improved in 5 out of the 6 domains on the YDI, with the largest global improvement in health and well-being, which grew by 4.39% between 2010 and 2018. Political and civic participation was the only domain to record an average global deterioration, albeit minimal, at 0.18%.
So it's clear that progress has been made on key indicators, but there is still room for progress as some countries are falling behind. Tracking progress in the Commonwealth is particularly important, with more than 60% of its population under, hear this, under the age of 30 years of age.
Of the 48 Commonwealth countries included in the 2020 YDI, 40, that's 83%, improved their scores. The Commonwealth average score improved by 2.8% compared with the 3.1% improvement in the global average. And although 2 Commonwealth countries, Singapore and Malta, are in the global top 10, Mozambique is amongst the lowest ranked countries, while half of the Commonwealth countries in the index are in the low or medium youth development categories. Clearly, there's more work to be done.
So far, we've seen and heard the facts and figures from the report, breaking news that is still being digested and dissected across the Commonwealth. Now it's time to hear from our panel of 6 global youth leaders who have read the report and are making use of its findings, as well as reflecting on its implications. So joining me now are Marcelina Ayuta, who won an award at this year's Commonwealth Youth Awards for her work with the Deaf Association of Samoa, along with her interpreter, Nue Maya Vega. Chairperson of the Commonwealth Youth Council, Tijani Christian. Chairperson of the Commonwealth Students Association, Maisha Reza. The chairperson of the Commonwealth Youth Peace Ambassadors Network, Christine Odera. The 2021 Commonwealth Young Person of the Year, Faisal Islam. And the immediate past chair of the Commonwealth Children and Youth Disability Network, Jonathan Andrews. Really great having all of our esteemed panelists with us. Let's start off here with a question to everyone. What are your initial reactions to the report, and how useful do you think its findings are?
So I think the report is fantastic, and the team has put in a lot of hard work and research to gather all of these data and generate this report. As an academic, I personally always love having access to the data and verified information produced by reliable organizations. The report also provides you with a website where I can search the data set. So reports like these are data and information rich, and it can be very useful for governments, decision makers, civil society, NGOs, youth and student groups, and many other bodies that are involved in youth development.
I like the report because, for one, we have factual data that shows that, the global average score improved by 3.1%. I'll tell you for a fact that is important for us in the field, because it's hard to not know what is happening around the world. But to have an improvement factually written, that just speaks wonderful news to all of us peace ambassadors out here. It means that we're doing something, and somebody has recognized the fact that work is being done and there's improvement. So we hope that that is also going to inform a lot of other engagements going forth.
Thanks so much, Maisha and Christine. So Maisha, what are the overall trends you're picking up in this report regarding education, and are we making any progress globally?
In this 2020 report, it has recorded that we have overall been making progress in the world of education, which is a positive sign. Some of the highlights would be an improvement in the overall global education scores by about an average of 3%, and there was a 5.3% improvement in the lower secondary school completion. Literacy rates have also improved by 2.4%. So these are all steady and positive steps forward, although I do believe that collectively we can do even better in order to achieve the SDGs by 2030. The report also shows us the challenges we are facing in education and exposes the extent of the digital divide in the world. Much of the challenges actually that we have been facing since COVID are not novel or caused by COVID per se, but COVID has amplified pre-existing cracks that have been left unresolved. So I was not very surprised to learn that up to 2018, the report showed that less than 40% of young people were considered digital natives. And digital natives are those who have 5 or more years of experience using the internet. This would have also contributed to the further marginalization of students when schooling went digital. And the pandemic has shown us that digital literacy and access to technology are indispensable when education had to be transformed overnight into online learning and assessments.
So let's stay with the subject of education, that section of the report. What are the statistics that stood out for you from this report?
Quite a few, actually. So, for example, in education, I noted that the South Asian region recorded the largest improvement in education scores with a 16.3% increase. So that is indeed impressive. And Sub-Saharan Africa also made substantial progress, posting nearly 10% improvement.
Let me ask you this. Let me put you on the spot. Do you think the findings in the report make you optimistic or worried at all?
I mean, I would say that I am rather worried that the pandemic has been causing so much damage and is hurling greater barriers and challenges for us. But I would say that I'm still very hopeful because through these greater challenges, we have seen significant collaboration and solidarity, innovative solutions to very difficult challenges, collaborations and partnerships to overcome obstacles, which has been really inspiring to see. I would like to highlight an example in the report on the good practice of the strategy adopted by the Rwandan Digital Skills Ambassadors program. In that program, the government leverages the skills of the young people who are digital natives to help those with low or no experience using the internet and helps young people access e-government services. And the ambassadors also receive additional training to upskill. We're also really proud of how student leaders have come together to lobby and mobilize resources for education.
Thanks so much to you, Maisha. Now over to you, Tijani, the chairperson of the Commonwealth Youth Council. Let me ask you the million-dollar question. What are the economic challenges facing young people today?
Let me first of all say thank you for having me here on this panel. And I would definitely say that I agree with Maisha about the importance of digital skills today. The report documents experiences of young people in the digital economy, their successes as authors, animators, and digital content creators, as well as the challenges they experience in working in the digital gig economy or the platform economy without social protection. The data shows broadly young people have good access, and the operative word there is good access to internet. In the Commonwealth, overall, about 67% of young people 15 to 25 have access to the internet. But as Maisha said, access does not mean that everyone is a digital native prepared to access economic opportunities online. Critical point for us to understand. So there is access, but are they really digital native? That's because the digital divide can be a great, very great, between those in rural and urban areas, for example, and between those who are in richer and even poorer countries.
Let me put you even further on the spot. How do you think young people are faring economically today?
It's an honest question to ask, and it also requires an honest answer. Young people are living quite precariously. According to the World Bank, globally, young people account for 40% of the population, but 60% of the global poor. This affects their capacity to take advantage of opportunities. When I look at the data over the 8 years, there was not much change in the scores in terms for the level of underemployment and for the proportion of young people not in education, employment, and training. Now, this is a critical and very glaring fact. Now, how are we faring? I would say not so well at this time.
And Tijani, I have to ask you this, it's a very, very topical. What do you think have been the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic?
But when we looked at what COVID has done, yes, it has opened up opportunities for online education. But the truth is, we know that the pandemic has had a great negative effect on levels of youth employment, because so many young people work in the industries affected by the closures and the present restrictions in hospitality, caring profession, and of course, entertainment. The report now is saying to us that the International Labour Organization estimated in 2020 that 38% of young people felt uncertain about their future career prospects because of school closures. And not even added to the fact, those who are attending schools, they also are affected. So just because they are attending school and they are online, it doesn't mean that there isn't a negative impact on their own learning experience.
Thank you so much, Tijani. Fascinating hearing your comments. Over to you now, Marcelina. What do you think about the report?
Well, the report is built around this theme of youth taking charge of our common future. And it gives lots of examples of young people making great contributions in the world. More than ever, young people are being recognized for the work they are doing to improve their communities. At the same time, the scores on the YDI are not strong. Political and civic participation is the only area where there was a global deterioration in scores and across the board. The scores are low, with the highest score at just 0.425 in Indonesia. That means all countries are in the category of low youth development when it comes to comprehensive structures and opportunities for political participation.
Thank you so much, Marcelina. Over to you now, Jonathan. What do you think has been the progress made on equality and inclusion?
So I think it's really good that the 2020 index includes a new and dedicated domain on equality and inclusion. There are some fantastic examples of equality and inclusion being recognised in this index, such as the different experiences of young men versus young women and those in poverty or situations of exploitation. For example, women and girls forced into early marriage, which are focused on, and that's great. It was slightly disappointing, though, that the index didn't measure the different experiences of young people with disabilities, for example, or people from other backgrounds and identities where they may well face disadvantage or other forms of equality and inclusion.
And I'm really interested to find out what more do you think can be done to achieve greater equality and inclusion for people with disabilities?
So, I mean, in terms of the number of young people with disabilities worldwide, it's estimated at around 220 million. So it is a really big number. And unfortunately, despite this estimate, there really isn't enough data at national and global levels to measure in this index the inequalities that young people with disabilities will face across the world. But I was really pleased to read about the work of the Leonard Cheshire Foundation and the Disability Data Portal, which I hope can be expanded further. And the research of the Leonard Cheshire Foundation highlighted those voices and experiences of young people based on stories prepared by citizen reporters, and also collected data to show the inequalities faced by young people in relation to education and employment. And this research showed that young people with disabilities are less likely to complete secondary school, have lower literacy rates than those without disabilities. And sadly, it also showed that over 39% of youth between 15 and 24 who had disabilities were not in education, employment or training. And for youth without disabilities, that statistic was lower at 22%, which means there's an inequality gap of over 17%, coming up to half of that number. And young people with disabilities are very clearly worse off in this regard. We very much need to collect more data like this around the world to be able to respond properly.
Really appreciate it, Jonathan. Thanks so much for those comments. Over to you now, Christine. Now, what stood out for you in relation to the issues of peace and security?
Thank you. It is interesting that the peace and security domain is the area in which there is global improvement, which is exciting for us as peace ambassadors. And that just goes to show that there's a lot of work that's also happening within the communities.
And I really have to ask you this one, putting you on the spot. What do you think have been the differences in relation to the experiences of young men and young women?
The score for gender parity in safety and security had not changed significantly. However, I understand for analysts that more young men than young women around the world report feeling safe in their communities. In fact, there was this interesting fact in the report, the gender parity in the gender gap in feelings of safety is actually the widest in the world's most peaceful countries. And this just goes to suggest that the gains in peacefulness have up to that point disappropriately accrued to men. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of men, a lot of young men than young women around the world reporting feeling safe in their communities. And I think what we need to do now going forward is have more women feel safer. If we're going to get to the same level where both men and women feel safe at almost the same amount, even better. But there's definitely more work that needs to be done to see that more young women feel safer.
And based on this report, where have we been doing well?
Well, I was really happy to see that fewer people are dying from direct violence, such as armed conflict and terrorism. You know, we're always happy to see such reports of fewer lives lost. The one thing that comes out from the report is it does not suggest that all environmental hazards have been eliminated. So countries around the world are still struggling with violence. And as we've mentioned, terrorism and armed conflict, humanitarian crisis and climate change, which is also an important security issue, right? And the improved average global score, though, suggests that maybe our countries are coping better with these challenges. And we have to continue to invest in peace and security to make sure that we do not lose all the gains that we've had this far.
Over to you now, Faisal, Commonwealth Young Person of the Year. Congratulations, by the way. Now, what jumped out at you as you read the report?
So wonderful to see a report that shows how government and young people can contribute. I felt most proud when I read about the contribution made by the COVID-19 heroes, 11 young people who were honored at the Commonwealth Youth Awards this year for their innovation, inclusive and effective community level responses to the pandemic. What they have done has made such a difference to the physical and mental health of young people who have really struggled in this pandemic.
And let me ask you this, what are the positive results in relation to health and well-being?
mortality rates fell, rates of HIV, self-harm, alcohol, tobacco, and drugs use also fell.
I have to ask you this. What did you learn?
There are also a few things I didn't know before I read this report. Why were road traffic accidents leading cause of death among young people, 15 to 29 years old, for over a decade? I know it is not measured on the index, but it was highlighted sometime, something we should address.
And what do you think about the effects of the pandemic on youth health and well-being?
The report speaks to the fact that the WHO is concerned that COVID-19 has disrupted and halted critical mental health services in 93% of countries worldwide, leaving many young people without the essential services needed to get through this pandemic. Also, many youth helplines are growing up, and victims of domestic violence are finding it hard to escape abuse due to lockdowns. I saw that a study in the UK showed that young people's well-being has been declining at a faster rate during the lockdown than that of older respondents. It's terrifying.
So, are there any good practices?
There was so much information in the report on how sports can help us achieve many of the SDGs, including those on health. In this pandemic, the mental health of young people has been tested, but we see examples in the report of the SARF project that helped support young people with mental health in Sierra Leone and South Africa. The surfing was like a therapy, and after participating, the young people reported feeling more confident, healthier, happier, better connected to their communities, and most importantly, less stressed. I think that's fantastic, and something like that could be easily adopted in other parts of the world as well.
So let me ask you as well, Marcelina, there's been one other topic discussed in the report, although not covered by the index itself. What do you think has been the effect of the pandemic on participation?
Even now, because of COVID-19, we have to be careful of shrinking civic and political space for youth due to restrictions on movement and gathering.
And let me ask you this. What do you think the Secretariat can or should do about this?
I'm glad the Commonwealth Secretariat is highlighting this issue in the report, and that they involved young people in the design of the index. I know various young people participates on the advisory committee for the index, but we now need to discuss how to expand participation in decision making for more young people.
Thank you, Marcelina.
Thank you.
And finally, Christine, is there anything to be said on the peace and security side of things in relation to COVID-19?
What we have seen, especially in the youth, peace and security domain, is a lot of young people then coming out and exercising their public servanthood. We've seen a lot of young people who might not necessarily have the peace and security community discussions because of the regularities to not have large groups together. But we've seen a lot of young people in the front line helping to disseminate face masks, to make sure that the vulnerable in the communities are able to protect themselves. We've seen a lot of youth groups coming out strongly to even make homemade hand sanitizers to make sure that, again, communities are able to be safeguarded. So we are seeing a lot of public servanthood being exercised by a lot of young men and women, which is a good thing, because where there's lack of good leadership, then young people are always there to stand in the gap.
Thank you so much, Christine, and indeed to all of our panelists. Great having you with us, and with such perspicacious young people, the future of the Commonwealth and indeed the entire world is indeed bright. Really great hearing from all of you. Thanks. Time now to hear from Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Honorable Gaston Brown. Not only is he the head of state of the Twin Island Paradise, but he's also the current chairman of the Caribbean Community CARICOM, a grouping of 15 states. And he's also the chairman of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. Prime Minister Brown spoke with me about what his government has been doing to ensure socio-economic advancement of young people in Antigua and Barbuda and in the wider Caribbean. Take a look.
It's an important index to have the empirical evidence as to the level of youth development within the Commonwealth, and for us to at least establish a baseline so that youth development could be monitored on a yearly basis, on a maybe every decade, to see exactly how we're closing the youth development gap or gaps within the Commonwealth. In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we are totally committed to the development of our youth. As you know, we have provided significant home ownership, land ownership, car ownership. We have subsidized homes to make them more affordable. We have subsidized the importation of motor vehicles by eliminating or reducing duties and taxes to make them more affordable for our youth. We have provided a significant amount of employment for our youth, and we do recognize too that some of them have been displaced as a result of COVID, but we believe that we'll have a strong recovery, and as a consequence we will get back to virtually full employment, which means that the youth of this country will be able to continue to enjoy full employment. We also have been educating our youth, and more recently we have established the fourth landed campus, University of the West Indies at Five Islands, in order to increase university enrollments to empower youth. We have provided on average about 1,600 scholarships for our students to study abroad. So we have had a very strong youth development program. We have the Entrepreneurial Development Fund as well. I didn't mention that earlier. That is one of the institutions that we established to provide funding for those who are seeking to establish their own business. And we literally have the infrastructure in place to develop our youth. We have shown commitment to our youth. And as I said, it is really part of the ethos of our institution, youth empowerment.
What you have been seeing is breaking news about a summary of the report and how it's proving useful for people all over the Commonwealth as well as the world. With her final thoughts on the report, here's Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, QC.
It's a real privilege and pleasure to speak to you as we launch our new and third iteration of the Youth Index report. We think it's going to be amazingly successful in helping you to deliver all the things you most aspire to do. So please, download it, use it, create the wonderful future that our young people need. It's there to help. So good luck, and I'll be watching, so I want to know what you do with it. Thank you so much.
This report could catalyze the kind of change and advances we all want to see across the Commonwealth and the world. The possibilities are indeed endless. Thank you so much, Baroness Scotland. We would like to hear from you. Share your thoughts on the report and questions for the experts. All the information you need is right on your screen. Also coming to a region near you, the YDI Roadshow and Town Halls, where we get to hear more of your views. Stay tuned to social media for the details and those updates. Finally, and as Baroness Scotland said, remember you can download the full report at youth-development-index.thecommonwealth.org. I'm Garfield Burford. We hope you've enjoyed this program in as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.
no one